everyone, and welcome back to Real Estate Unlocked, your go-to mini-series where we break down everything you need to know about buying and selling a home. In today's episode, we're talking about Section 15, the seller's acceptance of the Manitoba offer to purchase. This section is where the seller officially responds to the buyer's offer so that the deal either comes together or it doesn't. Let's break it down. So part 1 of Section 15 is pretty straightforward. It outlines 3 possible responses the seller can make after receiving an offer. The seller can either accept the offer, reject the offer, or accept the offer subject to a counteroffer. One important detail to note is that if no box is checked, the offer is automatically considered rejected. With option 1, the seller checks accept, and that means that they agree to all terms exactly as written. Once the seller signs and the acceptance is communicated back to the buyer before the deadline, the contract becomes legally binding and we officially have a deal. With option 2, the seller checks reject and the offer is declined. The transaction ends there unless the buyer decides to submit a new offer. And lastly, with option 3, if the seller chooses to counter, they must clearly write out the changes they are proposing. These changes could include to price, possession date, conditions, exclusions or inclusions, or any other term. The counteroffer must include a new deadline for the buyer to respond, and until the buyer accepts it in writing, there's still no deal. So just like the original offer, once a counteroffer is signed and communicated back to the seller before the deadline, it becomes binding. After this section in Part 1 is signed, the corresponding signature section in Part 2 must also be signed. If there's more than one seller, each seller must sign both parts. This ensures the response is properly executed and legally enforceable. Part 2 is all about communication. The seller is authorizing their agent to deliver the seller's written response to the buyer or the buyer's agent. This matters because a contract only becomes legally binding once acceptance is communicated. Signing alone isn't enough. It has to be properly delivered. So in real estate, agents typically communicate agent to agent and then to their respective clients. This structure helps keep communication organized, professional, and properly documented. It ensures timelines are respected, written notices are delivered correctly, and that there's a clear record of what was sent and when. Having this as a standard clause simply formalizes that process and keeps everything flowing smoothly. So Section 15 is really where everything comes together. It confirms whether the offer is accepted, rejected, or countered. It sets the response deadlines and makes sure acceptance is properly signed and delivered. This is the final step that turns an offer into a legally binding contract. That's it for today's episode of Real Estate Unlocked. If you're finding this series helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow along as we continue breaking down the Manitoba offer to purchase section by section. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.